All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and keep on trucking along here. And really just, thank everyone for showing up. Stephanie, I'm going to go ahead and mute you. Yeah, just thanks for spending your afternoon, with us. This is going to be a 3-part series. So today, we're going to be focusing on creating conditions where teams are effective and inclusive and the individual team members thrive. So that's our focus for today. And the 3-part interactive series is really meant to, grow and deepen relationships. Every time we do something like this or have focus groups, hi, Cecilia, we deepen relationships, we help network people meet each other. It's just a wonderful way to do that. And we just together in this whole session, how do we create flourishing teams? And then how can marginalized communities and individuals have a stronger voice? That's another, real strong focus for this series. And then to foster a collaborative network that shares resources and enables more healthy food, herbs, and medicinals to be grown and sustained over time, and then shared out widely through the city. So Fruitful Commons is really at work with on all those 3 so that we can actually affect the food system. I think right now community-led agriculture is kind of one-off, it's disparate, but if we can create a network, we're golden. We can really collect and harvest and share out that harvest and really make a dent in Austin's food system. So our mission at Fruitful Commons is to support neighborhood leaders like you guys and organizations to grow food, strengthen communities, and foster stewardship of the natural commons. And we're super thankful for the City of Austin Urban Forestry Department to invest in us. They've given us some great grants to do this series. And also last year we were able to give away 30,000 in mini grants. This year we've got 50,000 to distribute. So we're just really thankful that Urban Forestry really sees that, these sessions and our work is going to help them, enable the community to create forestry and urban orchard projects and have them be sustainable and really grow Austin's tree canopy from a ecosystem point of view. So really, really super big shout out to Urban Forestry. Maybe Dawn, could you help Stephanie in the chat? I see there's a question for her. You could help her out. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. So how tonight is going to go is we're going to introduce the 3 speakers, and we're going to be together. Most of the session we're going to be together. We're going to have one breakout session, and it'll be about 20 minutes or so, and there are going to be 3 breakouts, and we're going to put you in 3 breakouts, but we're going to enable you to kind of pick and choose which one you'd like to be in. And we're trying to design this so that it is the most interactive. I know I'm going to be talking a lot, but again, my partner in crime, she's not able to be here today. We were going to really trade off. So pardon that my voice is really taking over this session, but we'd really liked your voices in the session too. So we've created as many opportunities as we can think of and still keep it in, 90 minutes to have a really rich discussion. So we're going to ask you guys periodically to be putting your questions in the chat, and that way we know what's important to people and we can work with it, maybe another opportunity down the road to really work with what's interesting to people. And to make the most out of our short time together, it's a big topic, community-led agriculture and how teams can work well together. We're going to ask that everyone feels free to contribute, feel free to contribute thoughtfully, and be thoughtful about lots of voices want to be heard too. So try to keep your responses to 1 minute and really brief, and then encourage more voices, encourage this to be a space for a lot of voices. And then that moves us towards meeting our speakers. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to our 3 speakers. and have them raise their hands as I go to each one, and then we'll give them a little chance to talk about themselves and their projects. So Aaliyah, would you shake your hand? And yeah, there's Aaliyah Rose.
Hi, everyone.
So Aaliyah is a regenerative land and culture advocate, a nonprofit consultant, a group facilitator, and a program coordinator. Her life's work has been devoted to creating spaces where communities have unique opportunities to explore and celebrate all facets of their humanity. She specializes in connecting people to the diverse magic that exists on the edge of the familiar. From peace summits to equine facilitation, intentional farming, and regenerative culture building, Aaliyah incorporates kinesthetic and experiential offerings from the ground up. Her philosophy draws from nature-based biomimicry as a template for organizations to see the leadership tools embedded in the natural world. She believes that the production of healthy soil, vital fruit, and healthy leadership teams creates an alchemy that serves our communities with meaning and impact. So thank you, Aaliyah, for bringing your whole self here with us today.
Really honored to be here. Thank you.
And then Kristen, would you raise your hand? There you are, there's Kristen. Kristen, you might just say hello so that your face pops up.
Hi, nice to meet everyone.
Great. So Kristen is an events and fundraising coordinator for Adelphi Community Garden. She is part of the steering team with Adelphi Acre Community Garden. She manages the events and fundraising teams and has been with the garden for 7 years. Currently, she is leading the infrastructure garden bed rebuild project. She's a lifelong Texan and born in McAllen and now resides in Austin with her husband and 2 cats. So thank you, Kristen, for being here. Really appreciate it. And then we have Will. Will you raise your hand? There he is. Great. So Will Rack is the president of the board for Beacon Food Forest in Seattle. He's originally from Michigan. Will earned his Bachelor of Arts at the University of Michigan in philosophy and comparative religion. And latter attended Edmonds College, Washington to earn 2 degrees in landscape design and ecological restoration, as well as a certificate in urban agricultural systems. He's done his permaculture design course, and he holds certifications as a certified professional horticulturist, certified Eco Pro, master composter, master pruner, and master fruit tree steward. He's a master. So he volunteered extensively with the Beacon Food Forest for the past 5 years, and he's been on lots of committees. And he also serves on as the president of the board for Beacon Food Forest, and also a nearby food forest in Duval Food Forest. So professionally, he does landscape design and permaculture, primarily doing residential. And he also works alongside a wonderful permaculture author, Jesse Bloom. So thank you, Will, for being here. I know that your mission is to leave the world better than you found it and eat delicious food on the way. So thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
So we're gonna keep trucking, and we're gonna ask the speakers this one main question. And let me see, make sure, yeah. So I'm gonna give everybody, actually, this is not the question that we want to start with right now. Let me back up. There we go. I did want to introduce Diane. Diane Miller, would you raise your hand? There's Diane. And Shelley Penner, would you shake your hand? So Diane and Shelley are going to help facilitate in the breakout rooms. They're both with Fruitful Commons, and we couldn't do all this work without them. So wonderful, wonderful folks. So I want to give the speakers, before we go to that first question, just like 3 minutes each to give just a nutshell, like where's your project, what's the size of it, and the number of volunteers that you work with, and then what inspires you about that community-led project. So Aaliyah, would you go first?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So stoked to be here. I feel really honored to be having this conversation. My name's Aaliyah. I work in the intersectionality between nature, regenerative agriculture, conservation, and ecotherapy. I currently work and consult for several nonprofits. I like to have my hands in a lot of cookie jars. So the title and specific organization is a little hard for me, but two of the main projects I work on, one is the One Village Project. We're a 25-acre regenerative humanitarian farm that serves as an educational sanctuary for young visionaries from all over the world. I also work for the Watershed Association here in Central Texas on a new project called Art for Water, really infusing culture and again, in conservation. And I was also one of the founders of Casa de Miel, a 100-acre regenerative ecotherapy center just outside of Austin. Overall, I really work with biomimicry and the intrinsic teachings and metaphors of the natural world as a lens for us to grow our leadership team. I think, this conversation we're having tonight is actually my favorite because I think it's the absolute most important. If we focus all of our attention on our land and agricultural systems and regenerating those, although that's incredibly important, if our humans and cultural systems remain extractive and exploitive and exhaustive, then our efforts with the land won't last. And so, in an agricultural system, healthy fruit is a natural byproduct of healthy soil. And the same goes for our cultural systems. If our teachers and our farmers and our moms and our humanitarians feel cared for and nourished and seen and full of vitality, then an alchemy occurs where we all produce, enriched offerings. And so I work with volunteer groups from 2 all the way up to 150 in my work. And I think what's inspiring to me about community-led programs is that it really is an embodied practice of equity. Communities have solutions, foundations have resources, and so organizations come in and impose our ideas of what is needed in these communities. But in community-led organizations, the community is really driving that. It's also a return to the village, which we're so far away from. And so I think it's just really like a beautiful embodiment of where we need to be and where we need to go. And so that's why I do this work. I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
Yeah.
So Kristen, would you let us know like project size, location, how many volunteers, and what inspires you about the project?
Yeah, absolutely. And also very excited to be a part of this. So I'm with Adelphi Acre Community Garden, and we are an acre community garden in North Austin, Texas. And what we do is we're a team of 8 to 10 steering groups that leads a garden that is 78 plots large. But as of today, we have about 60 garden members. And one of the aspects of our garden is about creating a safe space and a place for people to learn how to be sustainable and how to do organic gardening. And so there are a lot of different educational aspects that we teach in our garden, because a number of them, like myself, when I first came into community gardening, it was all new. And so we have different ways to facilitate teaching, including children. Also, this is my cat, excuse me. Different ways to include the neighborhood for volunteering aspects. One thing that we do within our community garden is we also have Share the Harvest, which is just making sure that any additional harvest in our garden goes to food banks in the neighborhood, which is actually one of the things that inspires me. It's not only just sharing of minds and meeting gardeners in the neighborhood of all different walks of life that are interested in being sustainable, but it's the community, the interest in finding not only just a safe place, but a space that will allow people to learn and grow and meet new people, and then also work together, which is really inspired. So I definitely have only been on this community garden for 7 years, but it's been one of the best things I could ever imagine being a part of.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Will, now to you.
Everybody, joining you from Seattle, Washington, up in Washington State. Believe it or not, we're in a very similar climate hardiness zone to Central Texas, 8B. mostly because of the maritime climate in the Northwest. The Beacon Food Forest is a project that was started in 2012. Ground was broken. It was started as a permaculture design certificate project. We recognize that permaculture is kind of a colonizing term that was based on practices that have been practiced by indigenous people since time immemorial. It's agroforestry in the city of Seattle, overlooking the skyline. We have a beautiful view. It was begun at about 1.5 acres. We're ultimately allotted 7. We're slowly building towards that. So we're at about 3.5 right now. Really diverse set of plants and different things that we grow. Obviously, I mean, from my intro, I come from the plant world, but what is most intriguing about the Beacon Food Forest is the interactions that it's encouraging on the social side. What we're doing there is on public land, and it's all open harvest, which is a new idea, at least in Seattle, to have a space where anyone can come and harvest whatever they want, no questions asked. We just encourage ethical harvest and people leaving some for others. Because of that context, it's really a restoration of the commons, and it encourages a lot of different groups and people to come out and be part of the community where otherwise they might not have. We're on a very steep slope, and we're also trying our very best to make that a very accessible site, which is a challenge. We have switchbacks going all the way down. In recent years, we've had more of an awakening around social and racial equity and trying to move more towards that. And we're making some great strides in that department. The tools that we use, some of them are sociocracy, and it's also called dynamic governance. This mainly applies to the way that we meet and how we run those meetings. Very closely tied to that, we did workshops on nonviolent communication as well. That's a little bit more person to person rather than meeting oriented. There are other things that we do too, but we'll get into the weeds on that for sure. Many of the Beacon Food Forest core volunteers say they came for the plants and stayed for the people. I think that's always true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little bit on that. Just before we keep going, our board is now 12 people. We have about 8 committees for various topics like site development, community development. We have a BIPOC food committee, pollinator team, education. So kind of every facet that you can imagine. We have about 30 core volunteers. Really hard to stick a pin in that because people come and go and are more or less active and visible and less visible. Beyond that, our volunteer base is massive. There were pre-COVID times, there were days where we would have 150 people show up on a single day. Now it's not quite that, but just hard to really get a sense of who our volunteer base is at that scale. So definitely in the hundreds.
Wow, that's big. That's great. Will, you started to mention sociocracy. Maybe you could just kind of keep going in that, like starting with that first question. I'll put it in the chat, but I think you know it already. Like what frameworks and tools have you used to help volunteer groups make decisions and that are inclusive of diverse voices? And obviously sociocracy is, well, you can explain it. It's a framework. Is it a tool? What is that?
Both of those words I think apply to sociocracy. The heart of it is that our typical way of thinking of running meetings or groups or making group decisions comes from this context of sort of white supremacy or colonialism. Corporate, it's also embedded in corporatism in America of majority rule. That's what we think of as democracy, majority rule. Whoever wins the most votes, that's what ends up happening. Or sociocracy is really kind of turning that on its head and saying majority does not rule. Everyone has a voice, and if someone has a fundamental objection to an idea or a course of action or whatever, that objection needs to be incorporated into the whole, such that everyone's objections make it their way and are considered as part of the final solution. There's a lot of nuance to that, but that's the core of it. It's a model based on not consensus, which means that everyone has to enthusiastically agree, but based on consent, which means that everyone has to at least feel okay with the final solution. So that's distinguishing consent versus objection. Consent might mean, I'm okay with this, I don't love it, but I don't object to it. And there might be concerns that aren't full objections to. Sociocracy is most applicable in settings like co-housing. It's really, really useful for that. It is a much slower process to reach an end result, but I feel and I've found that once those end results are reached, they're something that the community can get behind much more wholeheartedly and cohesively, and yeah, to that extent. The trouble with sociocracy and dynamic governance is that once you really get into the weeds on it, it actually is somewhat complicated. We had a whole couple, I think 3-day workshop for our whole organization. It was very well attended amongst the core volunteers. And even after that, we're still kind of scratching our heads on it. Like, how many of these details do we really need to go into? In that way, it's challenging to pass on to new volunteers and to bring new people into the fold without it seeming mystical or overly complicated and things like that. So we're currently grappling with that and how we simplify it and how we focus on the core parts of it in a way that is not too heavy in that respect.
Great. Yeah, we've had similar with the Festival Beach Food Forest, looked a lot at sociocracy, wonderful, thought put into that, and, it has its challenges with actually implementing. So thank you for that, larger view, and just so wonderful to get to know you and have you here. It's really great. Thank you. Kristen, would you go next and talk about this question?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like making sure people are included is always a #1 aspect for being successful. We do it a little differently though. So, there is a steering group. I discussed that earlier, and we have a steering team between 8 and 10, but the steering team is more where they lead different groups of the garden. So in a garden, you've got different facets happening. You'll have your donation bed, you'll have a compost team, we have an orchard, so we have people dedicated to supporting our different fruit trees. You'll also have infrastructure, making sure things are not breaking down, people can access the garden and the gates work and little things like that. And so one of the things that we do with our garden is we have an orientation when people join. So we have 78 plots in our garden. Like I was saying, we have about 60 members today, but every one of those members is oriented into the garden. And we let them know, here are a couple of aspects of what we expect when you join the garden. One of them being, we want volunteering, 2 hours at minimum to volunteer within the garden just to keep it running. But the other aspect to it is making sure that, finding their interests. And so of those different groups that we have, we use an application called Rallyhood. And what we'll say is, are you interested in learning about compost? Are you interested in events and communication? Things like that. And they'll answer which they prefer. And then once they give us that information, we'll invite them to what we call Rallyhood. And so I want to share my screen real quick and just show you what that looks like. So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So Rallyhood actually came to us because one of our members had a daughter who was part of Girl Scouts. And they said that this is a site they used. And we were always struggling with, how do we communicate? How do we hear what people have to say in an efficient manner? And so one of them recommended Rallyhood. Now, we use a nonprofit for Rallyhood. We don't actually pay for this one. But what we found in the 7 years of being a functioning garden is it's allowed us to not only communicate quickly, but it also allows our steering teams to do focused conversation based on their different groups. Now, for me, I'm specifically in events and marketing, which is shared, but I also have another Rally Hood, which is part of infrastructure. Since we are working on a garden rebuild, we're rebuilding every one of our plots in our garden. But then we also have our steering team where we just put our meeting notes and we'll set, Zoom links and communications as to what's happening in the garden. Do we have an ant infestation? Is there enough, orange oil to go around and things like that? And then, of course, we also have our Adelphi Acre community main rally. And then this is where people will just say, hey, you know what, I had some questions about plants growing in my bed. Can anyone support me? And what it's turned into is a really great place for people to kind of bounce ideas off of each other, kind of communicate any issues maybe that's happening. Maybe someone, saw someone in the garden that they didn't feel comfortable with, and you can communicate quickly about what's going on. The other great aspect to this too is we have, it comes with an app too. So you can actively be responding and be able to just get the word out quickly. And there's a few things that come with Rally Hood too that I like. I feel like I'm selling software here. But the great thing about it too is everyone's talking about different things. So you can do digests. You can get a daily digest of what's been going on in Rally Hood, but you can also get a weekly digest. So if you don't want your email box completely filled with this stuff, you don't have to do it that way. So it's really customizable. But by using this, it has definitely allowed us to communicate and hear different members from all different groups. It also helps us facilitate our work days that we have every second Saturday. So people know what we're doing, what we're focusing in on, so they don't show up and they're not really sure. Or if we need them to bring something that day, that they'll know to do so. And this is how we've been functioning, and it's definitely worked for our garden. Now we're only an acre garden, but it's definitely made things easier when it comes to communication and getting people's voices heard.
You might be only an acre, but you guys are mighty. And
well, thank you.
Kristen, could you poke into one of those just to show like the inner, and just while she's doing that, one of the reasons why I wanted her to show this is the Parks Department really said, pointed to this product and this software, and that Adelphi Acres is really organized. They're one of the most sustainable, successful community gardens. So I just wanted everybody to be able to see the inner workings of this, that it has a calendar and events. And
we also use different files. So if any links are uploaded, we'll have a database of where to go find those. But really this message wall, you can see we do different events. Like we have a make and mend, and this at the end of every month. And so this one's specifically a clothing swap. So just getting the word out that, hey, come to our garden, we're gonna have a clothing swap. Others are reminding people to turn off the hoses because, we're all running around and busy, and so stuff like that is needed. And then there is one other aspect to it. You can send direct messages to people too, if you just want to coordinate and you don't want it to be on the main rally. There's an inbox and all kinds of settings and things like that. But it definitely helps when it comes to communication.
Great. Thank you so much. I like that it's like a low barrier to entry. It's not as confusing as Slack. Our teams use all kinds of ways of communicating, and however we can get more people engaged, that I know there's the digital divide, but there's also, just certain people are just not as savvy, or they just don't want to be on lots of devices. So it just seemed like a really good low barrier, to entry. And I know the Girl Scouts use it a lot, is what I had heard. So thanks for.
You're welcome. And we definitely do take into account that there is that digital divide. So that's also another thing in orientation we're upfront with. Are you comfortable with this technology? And if not, let us know and we'll work around that.
Yeah. Yeah. Texting or WhatsApp is better. Whatever's better. In-person conversations are better sometimes. So great. Thank you so much. Aaliyah, would you go ahead and answer that same question?
Yeah. So because I work on so many dynamic and different organizations and projects, I think I'll just speak more high level. The One Village project that I mentioned, the 25-acre humanitarian farm, is actually on the Big Island of Hawaii. And so, it's a very small community in the middle of the ocean, and the equity conversation is very different. It's a very new wound of occupied land and territory. And so, and even in that community, flyers are still the way people are communicating. And so I think I really loved what I was hearing from you, Will, just about like the process of sociocracy being much slower. So if I were to say that I subscribe to specific frameworks academically, I would say probably regenerative development, because it looks at organizations as organisms. And so I wouldn't go into Seattle and plant or add the amendments that I would add here in Austin, Texas, without taking inventory of what's there. And so I really look at organizations as a mindfulness practice. So really taking assessment, being as present as I possibly can be, being as curious as I possibly can be, and being as willing to step in and get revolutionary, or even returning to old, indigenous practices of communication. And that goes as far as, language. We don't call our meetings when I'm working on the project in Hawaii. We call them council. Just being really cognizant and intentional with the way that we're communicating and connecting. I also think that, I wonder how many farmers are on this call who are spending way more time in their Google Docs than they are in their soil. And that can be really depleting. And so something we talk about often in my projects is attention restoration theory. How can, if we're spending hours and hours and hours in Zoom meetings and in conversation, at the end of the day, we're actually not as productive and creative as we can be. So even though it's a slower process to add mindfulness, to add heart-centered, authentic relating, to add nonviolent communication practices into our meetings or into our council or into our days, it might take longer, but actually in the long run, how can our being together inform our doing? How can we really embed our volunteer groups and our teams with like the spiritual nutrition of why we all got into this in the first place? And so I tend to take a lot longer to do things. I tend to redefine what success is. And the regenerative development perspective is looking at organizations as like, okay, well, plants, if a tree is fruiting 100% of the time, it's actually dying. It's sending out all this information to survive. And so similarly, we are 90%, non-human DNA. We are the bacteria we find in the fungus we find in the world around us. And so it makes sense that we could look to the natural world as an indicator and as a teacher and as a guide for how we can be more inclusive. Forests that are dense with diversity are forests that are thriving. It's paramount to the success of the whole that we are inclusive and diverse. We couldn't survive without having different voices in the room. Or even, my favorite metaphor is I work with horses often, and they poop a lot, like 50 pounds per horse per day. And if we were just to leave that manure in a pile and leave it unattended, it becomes toxic. It's a resource that is untapped. And similarly to our own pain, our own struggling, our own suffering in our groups and independently, if we don't have time to touch those things, those wounds in our organizations, then it can become toxic. But the second that we turn to it and we really give it attention, we befriend it, we spend time with it, we look at it as the most important to-do list item that we can be tackling in our day, then we can transmute that and turn it into our greatest resource. We build trust, we build connection, we build rapport, we build devotion to our projects. And so then accountability becomes a byproduct of what we're doing together, instead of something that we need to like check off a list. I think answer this question. I hope.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for bringing that around. I mean, even though it's kind of a high level and it's not as kind of, tool oriented, like all of that is just the space that we want to generate, right? Like it's
Yeah.
the space to generate.
And I think, the reason I just kind of turned away from like the specificity of the tools is that each organization, each group of people, and, to speak to what Will said too, we have, because this is so imprinted and specific to the alchemy of the people that are there, just the same way we plant specific to the environments that we're in, it's hard to integrate new people. It takes a long time. It's not just like we go through a training process, and then it's done and it's effective. And so I think I could give the tools that are specific to my organization here in Austin. I can give the tools that are specific to the one in Hawaii. And they're different because it's really about taking like a needs assessment on like a human level and then implementing what works.
Mm. Gorgeous. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for all that. Thanks all of you for answering that question and giving us more to think about. So hopefully everybody's been kind of churning through, thinking about everything Aaliyah and Will and Kristen are saying, and has some questions. We're going to go into breakouts, and that's going to be a great place for you to jot those questions down and share them in your breakout sessions. We're going to do our best to collect all your thoughts, your questions, and if we can't answer them in the breakouts, we're just going to figure out a way to, address them at some point. We've got, it's a long game that we're in this for. We've got time, and we're going to do the best we can as Fruitful Commons to be a Fruitful Commons together, where it's, we give the time that it takes to really hear all the questions, really work through them together, and and just bounce things off each other and learn and network that way. So we'll go into the breakout sessions, and we'll ask you to put your questions, in the breakout chat. And we're going to also give you a prompt, right there in that first minute or so to reflect on, the question is, it's basically the same as, put your thoughts in the chat. It's one thing I'd most like to discuss is, and, one thing, you might have two or three, and that's fine. Go ahead and list two or three, but the prompt is going to be, one thing I'd most like to discuss. We'd like to just give you a minute of just quiet. Don't put it in the chat right away. Just go ahead and wait until the facilitator in the room, says, all right, everybody put that in the chat. They'll give you about a minute or so. That way there's just some quiet, little bit of breathing, and you just can really, reflect and meditate on this question. And we do have a question that we'd really like to also put in the space, because we've done a lot of focus groups, a lot of surveys and things in the last year and a half. And one thing that we hear a lot over and over is that a few people on the team get the burden of most burden. Like there's just a few on the core team, and they're the ones working really hard. Like, and others are just showing up for one day. That kind of conversation is in the space, as well as, once you have people that really want to take on some responsibility and accountability, they drop off sometimes. And sometimes it's because we didn't do a good enough job, like bringing them in, onboarding, and maybe it's, it's just too complicated. Or so we're gonna ask the question in the breakout rooms for everybody. Speakers can answer, everybody can answer, but it's going to be a question that sounds a lot like, in what ways do you encourage accountability and shared responsibility, so that you encourage people and you give them that space to really win and rise up? And so that'll be the question in the chat after you get your time to kind of put your own question in the chat. And you can also choose a different breakout room if you want to, be in different ones that they're going to be titled. So you'll know, which speakers in that room and which Fruitful Commons person is in the room. And there's a couple people scribing. So, if you want to bounce around, feel free to do that. We don't have a lot of time, so we're gonna do about 20 minutes in these breakouts. But feel free to do that. If You have questions, the scribe in that room can help you, but you just go down to the breakout dialog box when that comes up, and you'll see a button that says join. Click on the join button and it'll ask you, are you sure you want to join? And you say yes. So you can pick out a different breakout room there. Okay, so we'll get you sent away. Don, are we ready for about 20 minutes? So let's give them actually 6:15, let me see. Yeah, let's come back at 6:35. How about that? Whatever that is. How many minutes is that? Somebody do the math. 20, less than 20. Let's just give them 20 and we'll work that out. Are you all set, Dawn? You there?
Sorry, I was on my phone. Yep, we're ready.
Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead and launch the
Let's go.
breakout. Thank you. Oh, and I guess maybe I can't go in. So Dawn, you'll need to assign Kathleen Recorder and Lisa H.
Huh.
And gosh, if I'm the co-host, I'm gonna make you, let's see, can I join a breakout?
I have Kathleen in.
Sometimes they're on 2 devices. Yeah, you just have to assign them breakout rooms. There we go. So I'm gonna go.
She's assigned. Okay, good. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go in my room. Thank
Okay.
you. All right. Oh, I guess we are recording. Okay, we can record this room. Hello, everyone. So yeah, if everybody would just take a moment to be quiet, reflect. You know, Will, you could even do this too, like any questions that are coming up for you. Which is good to have that rich discussion at the end. And I'll give you about a minute and ask you to put it in the chat.
Can you share the prompt again?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll reduce my screen. So the prompt is, one thing I'd most like to discuss. Thing I'd most like to discuss, or the question that I would most like answers to. All right. So you don't have to put any questions in for sure. So I'll just go on to the question we'd like to, like I said, we overwhelmingly heard from our focus groups. Start with this one and then we'll go to the others in the chat. So in what ways do you encourage accountability and shared responsibility?
So this is for me.
It could be for you and it could be for anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely would love to hear other people's perspectives on it, but I'm happy to jump in. So the sociocracy is not a panacea for every problem in an organization by any means. I think it, like I said in the large group, it really applies best to meetings. But then we have lots of other things where there's email, and then we're meeting on site, which isn't really a meeting. Lots of different ways. In addition to that, I think it's sort of part of an ecosystem of the way that an organization runs. So it's a tool in a specific context. Beacon Food Forest itself, kind of how we get stuff done, quote unquote, is sort of entrepreneurial in nature. More or less, the bones of the organization doesn't need any one thing that much, but when we have specific goals, usually one person will say, I think we should do XYZ. And usually that only really happens, because we're all volunteers, if the person who suggests the idea leads the execution of it. and in proposing the idea, obviously we go through sociocracy to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with actually doing it. But then the doing is up to the person who proposed it for the most part. So the accountability and shared responsibility is sort of incumbent upon people who want to lead a project. Outside of that, when we have issues that absolutely do need to be addressed but aren't really anybody's idea, a good example of that is when like rules, codes of conduct, or crises come up. We've had numerous instances of homeless people squatting and also creating biohazard issues on site. Things like that absolutely has to be addressed, but there's not really any one person that it would be addressed to. We're still developing new ideas and ways that can happen. We, to your point, and you pointed out, have by default relied heavily on the core volunteers and the people who just give and give and give. But honestly, it's not really sustainable, and it's not fair either to some of these people. We have one local resident that consistently takes care of the biohazard issues, and that's a particularly not fun issue to deal with. So we're experimenting with some ideas about paths of escalation, issues that come up and how they get dealt with, and who would do that, and how it gets brought upward in the chains to eventually reach places like the board of directors. We haven't really built that out fully yet.
Can you speak just a little about escalation and that language and how you use that in getting people to carry out projects?
Yeah, that's definitely not our lead foot when talking about projects. Usually when we talk about conflict mediation, we're in the business of de-escalation and not escalation. And that's certainly my orientation around conflict resolution. We have a lot of different committees, and they are all very topically oriented. And usually when there's an issue of any kind, we can bring it to a topical committee, and it's usually pretty obvious the urgency of what the issue is. If it's a biohazard issue, that goes to our site development committee, and they would recognize that that's a really important thing to take care of quickly. Issues of accessibility fall in that same category. Issues of interpersonal conflict would go to something like our community development committee, or potentially to the board itself. So it really depends. But again, we rely entirely on volunteers, and it's my opinion that in the absence of a defined process, it's very easy for it to fall just onto the core volunteers, the people who just give and give. There's a lot of different ways that could go, but that's the short answer. Yeah.
Just on that note, one of the questions from Stephanie is, how do you go from one person to the core group of volunteers? So how do you get that core group, Will, that is even being involved?
I had a volunteer ask me about something very similar to this, and the truth is that the term core volunteers is a really slippery term, and there are people who've devoted a lot of time to the organization over the years, and so we have people who put in hundreds and hundreds of hours that are not on any email lists or any committees. Like, how do we classify a person like that? They don't know when there's a biohazard issue, but they're there constantly weeding, and they're like the foundation of our weeding team. So it's really hard to pin down. And in my experience, there is an absolute inevitability of people's lives changing. We've had people who are massively invested in the project just suddenly disappear because of life changes of their own, whether it was a job or school or family or whatever. It could be anything. So it's hard to tack down. The thing that in that realm that I am more concerned with is trying to bring people up. And there's a lot of facets to that. How to generate leads, or leads, especially core volunteers, is not really the term that I would use, I guess. There's a lot of ways that I think are great for that. One is to just establish actual personal connections with people and develop friendships with them, and not just focus on the work, but actually make it a place that people enjoy coming to. We call our monthly get-togethers work parties, and we, as Aaliyah was mentioning, the terminology itself might just be problematic. Like, yeah, party's in the term, but work is in the term too.
Right.
We used to give lunch to everyone before COVID times, and there were people who came out just for the lunch, just to hang out, and I think that's great, you know. But in a very true equity perspective, I think that we need to examine and challenge some of our assumptions about what it is that core volunteers are doing. And the Beacon Food Forest has for a long time had a core volunteer base that was not really representative of the community that it is serving. The Beacon Food Forest is in the most diverse zip code in Washington state. But the core volunteer base is predominantly like 85% white. And there was a lot of criticism from people of color, especially not feeling comfortable about engaging with a core volunteer base that looked like that. We're like, well, why is that happening? You know, and it might seem that the core volunteers are doing a service to the community by holding these positions of leadership and putting all this on their back. But in a way, they're also taking all of the opportunity and all of the power to do these things and hoarding it to some degree. So paving the way and opening space for people to enter is another way that I think you are generating activity. In the past year or so, we have hired our only staff position, which was and we hired a person of color who grew up in Beacon Hill, like lived there her whole life. And she was instrumental in developing our BIPOC food committee and BIPOC community garden. The BIPOC area and committee are autonomous in a lot of ways and self-determined. And so they can set for themselves what they want everything to look like. And that has been extremely effective. And that level of self-determination and autonomy has, in some cases, bucked the trends that Beacon Food Forest organization has thought were the right way to go. And even in the output of what that has generated, those people are now finding themselves more comfortable getting involved in the rest of the organization that is perceived to be more white. So there's a lot of lessons there, I think, and we're still living through them.
That's really fascinating. As the scribe, I want us to take some time to think about what main insights we have and what questions remain. Just quickly, other questions in the chat. Creating a culture of accountability for circle leaders under sociocracy. How do you use this in a more rural setting, like the sociocracy model, and potentially other forms of project management and leadership? How do you get people to feel belonged? And how do you deal with volunteers who make leadership commitments but fail to deliver? So that's definitely things we're still reflecting on. But also I want to just, what are some insights that we've had so far? Does anyone want to? Thank you, Will, again.
Yeah, I kind of have some questions, and this is related to some of the organization and some of the things we're trying out with the Central Texas Mycological Society, which isn't necessarily centered around place, but it still is a volunteer-run organization. We do quite a bit of different projects related to mycology in the community, some related to waste reduction, some related to helping the University of Texas like build their biodiversity library in the Plant Resource Center. So just a lot of different things. But as we're sort of growing, the challenge that I'm finding is similar to what I'm hearing here, like where there's, you know, core people that are doing a lot of the work, but we're, you know, as we're trying this sociocracy model where we have circles that are centered around where work is actually done rather than like sort of these sort of hierarchical labels that kind of get lost, like people sort of get lost in titles, you know. Like we're getting to a point where we've had a lot of people getting involved in our leadership circle, coming to the meetings. There hasn't been a whole lot of consistency, but we need to get to a point where we choose through consensus like leaders. And like it's been about almost a year now where we've been trying this model. Is there any process, or like how do you all feel, like how has that worked in like maybe with the Beacon Food Forest, like how did you all sort of choose your main leadership circle, which is like equals a sort of board per se? Because by Texas law we have to have, you know, like on paper, like we have, you know, our sort of board per se, like, you know, we have those titles outlined, but we don't have those people like elected through consensus at the moment. I know that's a lot and very specific, but I don't know. I feel really hung up on this.
And I think we're gonna run out of time. I can't see the clock at this moment, but it's a great question. So I put it up here. How do we choose select leadership is obviously still present as a question.
Okay.
And
So I can just
yeah,
talk about that briefly. The Beacon Food Forest is run by a nonprofit board, and we run that very much like a nonprofit. So their application process, and we review the applications and we take people on based on that. The leadership of the committees is very different, and that is very elective. And it has been in the past those who are just willing to take on the duties that leadership requires. It's important to recognize that Beacon Food Forest is a little further along in succession. In the early days, it was a lot more like the latter and less like the nonprofit board. So yeah, I guess we're getting kicked out here.
Any quick insights that we can write down? And maybe we'll just give time in the main session for chatting, you know, those insights.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I appreciate you bringing up, you know, you think about who has the time and the resources to volunteer, and you inevitably end up not being able to reflect the community that you want to serve. And I think it's, I work for the Central Texas Food Bank, and it's a challenge that we're always looking at and trying to address. So I just appreciated you bringing that up to the table, especially like, you know, we have gardening classes and nutrition and cooking classes, and, you know, trying to, you know, our location isn't the most bus accessible. So like what can we do to provide our services to the communities that we're trying to reach? But I know we're about to finish, but I just wanted to, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right, let's go back. Well, I guess we've got 42 seconds. Ollie, how would you summarize that as an insight? I heard a appreciation for sure. I think I also heard like language Language.
Yeah,
Language.
yeah, I guess, or maybe this is like a little bit of a different tangent, but we're also trying to work with more rural communities. And, I feel like a term like socialocracy would be, maybe something that's wouldn't be taken to, or so just, I guess that was just a.
Almost dinner time. That's why he's so persistent.
All right, everybody's coming back. Wonderful. So from here, I think let's go ahead and do our best to have the scribes, just summarize from the notes document. Are you guys seeing my screen? Am I still sharing the document? Or do you just see
Not
everything?
anymore.
Okay,
No more. Yeah.
great. All right, Andrew, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think among the top level insights coming out of our discussion, two big ones, and I'll actually start at the bottom. I think two big ones are, first, the notion of creating a shared vision. So we had a conversation about the importance of finding opportunities to keep all the different participants in a space on the same page, and kind of briefly passed over some strategies to do this. So on the one hand, we could think about trying to create fun environments that actually motivate participation and turn leadership into something that's fun and desirable, and less a sort of daunting responsibility. So some of the ideas we heard about were having walking meetings, having outings, organizing staff meetings that begin with opportunities for peers to bond. We talked about the importance of including community voices from neighboring community spaces. And then I think importantly talked about diversifying input. So although these projects are often centered in nonprofit spaces and certainly around agriculture, gardening, there could be a lot to learn about bringing in voices from other domains of expertise. So imagine what a business consultant might say about the organization. Imagine what someone in sales might say about how to make the organization more efficient or more productive. And then I think another big point here is a conversation about the importance of mentorship. And I think the mentorship here is kind of going in many directions. So on the one hand, we have a discussion about trying to find leaders from organizations that you admire if you're already in a leadership position in a budding organization, to begin brainstorming collectively with them and find strategies. Another is including youth voices, thinking about bringing in youth that may be interested in the space, but have difficulties reclaiming the daily energy to be involved, and teaching them to be a part of the community. So I think there's a kind of solidarity that comes from finding mentorship from leaders who have more time and more experience, but then in also becoming a leader to people who maybe are in a position that you found yourself in, when you started to become interested in these things.
Right.
So those are the big ones. I think among the questions that we're still thinking about are, I think, trying to understand where a specific organization is in terms of scaling and growth, and how to identify the specific kinds of strategies and tools to implement depending on where they are in their development. I think that's the big one that kind of folds in a bunch of these together. So really thinking about where an organization is in terms of its growth and its timeline, and how to find the appropriate tools for where it is.
Thank you, Andrew.
Mhm.
Super helpful. This is so exciting. Greg, would you like to go next? Or Aaron, either one?
Oh, yes, I'm unmuted.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
So the first insight for us was around, there was just a common theme of being thoughtful about how the work of the organization is best handled, and different processes that can be thought about. One person said correct actions quickly. Another said set expectations up front. And then in talking about rallyhood, the idea of channel captains came up, which I thought was particularly clever, to make sure that each area had someone responsible. And then we talked about some more general ideas. And then finally, someone said, no volunteers, they slow progress. Give the money to the people that are the earth keepers. And I just thought that was a great, counter view or companion view of saying, make sure that all of our people are well trained and doing the best work at all times.
Great.
And then finally, for the questions, there was the idea of a book, a One Straw Revolution, that had interest in next actions. I know I'm personally taking that action to read that book. And then there was an area of open questions around having different types of organizations, field work versus community garden, and how do we all learn from each other, even though there might be very different roles for the individuals.
I feel like we could just go all day or a whole weekend on this whole topic. This is so fascinating. Yeah, Aaron, want to go next? We're a little short on time, so let's go and end on time.
All right, so some of our main insights were, a question / insight is that how to grow volunteers into leaders. And a big focus was just building friendships and acknowledging that some people may sort of be committed volunteers, even if they're not plugged into all the channels. And then another insight was that the core volunteers may not be representative of the neighboring community of the project. We're focusing on the Beacon Food Forest, as that's where Will's drawing his experience from. And in that case, many people of color, Will was saying, felt uncomfortable dealing with the core volunteer base, who are predominantly white. And then we also heard from Ollie, who raised a great point of who has time and resources to volunteer. And then I think another big insight was, how do you organize meetings and communication, decision-making versus actually carrying out the projects? And it seems like sociocracy is more for the former. It's about how to do decision-making, but it's not about project implementation. So there's still a question about how to carry out projects, how to make sure volunteers become leaders and stay involved. And then a question, more of a question, but this is also an insight of, will everyone take to sociocracy the fact that maybe in some areas the term could be more jargon than anything.
Great. We are leaving with lots of questions. I can hear, like, there's just so much more that we can do. So if everybody enjoys this session, let us know, and maybe we can keep doing more and more like this. I could see it being an annual thing, just something we reconvene and just keep working on together this topic. Thank you, everybody, for all of that. I am going to shift really quickly so I can do it real quick, and then we're going to end with something fun. Let me share my screen again. Just to let you know what's coming up next. So the next session is going to be focused on engaging your community. Andrew and Aaron have been doing a fantastic job getting out into the community and really starting the ball rolling on this conversation. We've obviously got a lot of experts in Austin that we're going to draw upon too. If you have speakers that you think you would love to hear, even countrywide, worldwide, let us know and we can reach out to them and see if they would be a speaker. Then we're gonna, in the fall, we're gonna talk about sustaining trees and their ecosystems. So they'll kind of more focused on the site. And then I wanted to let you guys know that on June 16th, we are having a fundraiser and summer social. So it's going to be from 5:30 to 8 p.m. at the KMFA studios, it's a new radio station building. The architecture is really wonderful, but it's right next to the Festival Beach Food Forest and Community Garden and RBJ. So it's kind of in that hood of one of our main projects, and everyone is invited. You know, we've got really $70 as the ticket right now. Oops, pollinator is spelled wrong, but $70 is the ticket price. But what we're offering to gardeners and other groups is sliding scale. So please let us know if you see it being advertised. I should put links, maybe Diane, you could find links really quick to the fundraiser, the Eventbrite, but or just even to our website page. And that way you can, you know, say, I'd really like to go. And that $70 is steep, or whatever you'd like to do. Also, if you know sponsors, like we're looking for, especially corporate sponsors that might want to contribute to all of this work, would be great. So appreciate that. And then November 5th, East Feast. So it's the first annual. You're going to want to get the first annual t-shirt that you're going to wear, you know, 20 years from now and go, I was like at the first one. But we're starting to look at creating a citywide celebration of sharing food, growing food and sharing food. And the Festival Beach Food Forest declared in 2012 that there shall be a food forest, and that we shall have, you know, kids in schools nearby that are sharing some food. And so we are envisioning a celebration this year. It's going to be smaller, and we would love all of your participation. If your garden or organization's interested in being part of that, please, you know, reach out. Yeah, you can write to contact at Fruitful Commons. So I'm sorry, connect at Fruitful Commons if you have any ideas about East Feast or any of these things. So I'll put that in the chat, that email, in just a minute, but I just wanted to quickly go through that and then bring it back to the speakers, just to say, like, a sentence, you know, what are you hearing that's new, that you can hear that might help, you know, create conditions where teams can flourish. And then to close us off, I'm going to ask everyone to give a couple of minutes, again, another kind of quiet time, to share a takeaway, like something that you might be able to implement in your community project. It would be really helpful to us to know that there was something you were able to take away from this session, and we would just love to get that feedback. So yeah, if the speakers would speak. So Kristen, do you want to go for it? Like what you might be hearing newly, what you might have gotten out of this session, and just, you know, thank you so much for being here.
Sure thing. I think one of the big takeaways is from my counterparts, is that the idea that you have to really be aware of the groups you're with and be respectful of the space. I thought that was really nice. Being in a garden, a community garden in a specific part of a very tech-oriented city, you've got to stop and think, what are other groups like? And you know, that really makes me want to go appreciate other groups and get out there and see what they're doing. So that was my big takeaway.
Great. Thank you. Aaliyah, would you go next?
Yeah, I really appreciated the comment about no volunteers, honestly. And if we had had 4 more hours, I would have loved to unpack that further. I try not actually to do volunteer programs any longer, because I'm not going to ask people of color to work on land for free. And I'm really devoted to creating equitable spaces and long-term commitments to land. And so I think my takeaway from that comment and just what I've been hearing is like, we just got to get more creative. Like old systems just aren't working any longer. And everybody is depleted and tired and really thirsty for spiritual nutrition. And so how do we really aliven our organizations and our strategies to create environments that people want to work in, that they want to become leaders in, and that can support their life? Because it's not easy right now. So that's really what I'm taking away, is like, how can we get even more revolutionary and more creative?
Great. I need to talk to you about our Triple C. Remind me sometime, the Civilian Conservation Corps that the federal government's trying to get going. Like, we are really making an attempt to say, hey, let us give that money to people who are tending the land and sharing the harvest. Like, let's do this. Let's create some living wages for that. So very exciting.
I'm here for that conversation.
Yeah. All right, Will, would you give us your thoughts?
Yeah, I had worked in corporate America a little bit, and I tend to have a systems mind. And Beacon Food Forest has had value statements and codes of conduct and all of these documents for a long time. So I've been more focused and almost had horse blinders on about structure and process. And that's very applicable to where our organization is at in its evolution right now. But what I've heard this week at our board meeting and then today from especially Aaliyah is the importance of reorienting around a common vision and really getting buy-in from people about the values and the reason that people are there. I myself do things based on the why, and I think most people do it from the why. You know, I'm not going out to the garden just to weed for no reason. I need that, and it's important to recognize that. That was a big takeaway for me, and so finding ways to integrate that into what we do, yeah, will help a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. So if everyone would go ahead, Diane, do you have I see your highlighter on the question. Yeah, share one takeaway, one thing that you apply in your work with your team or your community. I'll give you a couple minutes. And feel free to just share whatever's there, whatever's alive right now. Okay. Well, feel free to keep writing and thinking and hit enter and share your thoughts. Really helpful to us to know how we're doing and how to improve. But given that we've just got 1 minute, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's here, and feel free to reach out to us, connect@fruitfulcommons.org about anything, whether it's East Feast or the next Gathering of Growers conversation, speakers that you might have, or the fundraiser. Just reach on out, and have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon in this semi-cool day. And if you'd like, put one word in the chat, like one word, what's your experience in the moment? Yeah, thank you. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.